Hi everyone! In today's video I'm going to be making a miniature doorstep to go in front of the door of my doll's house, and I want it to look like bricks. Now as you can see, I have previously made bricks for the walls of my doll's house and also for the path in front of the doll's house. So the bricks on the walls are quite textured and on the pathway are quite smooth. So in previous videos I did all of the experimenting to learn how to make these bricks, so I'm hoping that in today's video I can use those techniques to make a little doorstep to go here. So my plan is that I will have a doorstep that has two steps that will slot underneath the door just here to fill the gap that is in between this green bar at the bottom and the bottom of the door. So in terms of the resources that I'm using today, my main material is going to be this multi-purpose filler. I bought a huge bag of it when I was doing the brickwork for the doll's house, because I knew that I needed to cover all of the walls of this doll's house, and I also have another doll's house which is waiting to be renovated, so I thought if I buy a big bag it would be more cost effective. But I do just keep a little bit of it in this tub so that I can access it more easily. So obviously I'll be using water with the filler, and this little cup is what I will use to mix the filler. It's already covered in paint because I've used it previously. A little spatula or palette knife for mixing the filler and applying it. I needed some dark paint and I will explain why soon. I didn't actually use the burnt umber, I used the Payne's grey, and then I used some different colours for painting the bricks, which I will show you later on in the video. The kebab skewer is for scoring the pattern into the bricks. And the soft pastels will be to add some extra colour and texture near the end of this project. So a couple of other items that I needed were things like pen, a pair of scissors. I do use a piece of sandpaper at one point, and also some glue, and this cardboard is what I was using to make the little doorsteps, and I also kept a little bit to work on so that when I was using the messy filler and paint I wouldn't get it all over my table protector. So the cardboard is protecting the table protector, which is protecting the table. So to start off with, I made a little template to try and decide where I wanted the first step to go. This cardboard was double thickness, which was great because it was just under the height of the green piece of wood below the door, and when I add the filler it will add a little bit of extra height, so I think it will be just the right size. Really, I should have made this little template out of paper, and as you'll see in a moment, I do switch to using a scrap piece of paper to make the template. So on the cardboard I'd already marked off how wide I wanted the doorstep to be and also the central point. So I cut my piece of scrap paper so that it was the same width, and I folded it in half so that it would match the central point. I'd folded the piece of paper in half so that I could create a symmetrical shape so that both sides of this doorstep would be the same. When I cut this out, you will notice that I didn't follow the line exactly. That was just because I wanted to change the shape slightly. Before I cut it out of the cardboard, I did lay it in front of the door just to double check that I was happy with the shape and the size. Although this cardboard was a double thickness, it actually wasn't too difficult to cut out. Next, it was time to make the second doorstep that would sit above the first one. And this doorstep needed to fit in between the two sides of the door frame. So I started by cutting out a little tab here, which would be the bit that would go right up to the floor that's in the art gallery space inside the doll's house. So if anybody's new to this channel, I'm converting this doll's house so that it's like a converted warehouse with an art gallery at the bottom and an apartment at the top. I've saved all of the previous videos into a playlist if you'd like to go back and see how the doll's house looked right at the beginning before the makeover and all of the steps that brought it up to this point now. I try to upload a new doll's house video every week. I've actually uploaded more than one this week. If you would like a notification each time I upload a video, please do remember to switch the notifications to all. So to do this, you just go to the same button that you press to subscribe. And if you click it again, it brings up a little menu where you can select your notification options. I cut out the little doorstep and placed it down to check its size. And then I actually opened the main door of the doll's house just to make sure that I could still open and shut it whilst this new doorstep was in place. Everything worked, so it was time to cut this doorstep out of cardboard. But this didn't quite go as planned, because when I cut this doorstep out and laid it back in place, I realised that as I'd been changing the shape of this doorstep, I cut the little tab off the back. So this meant that it was sitting a little bit too far back and wasn't overlapping over the first step in the way that I wanted it to. So I cut it out again, but this time with that extra centimetre at the back of the doorstep. Now that this second step was cut out of cardboard, I wanted to try opening and closing the main doll's house door again because the cardboard was a little bit thicker, so I wanted to make sure that the door still opened, which it did. So now it was time to make up the filler mixture. So at the beginning of the video I said that I needed some dark paint, and I started by diluting this dark paint with some water. And the reason for this is because when I'd made this brickwork I'd used filler without adding paint, and as you can see some of the areas of the filler are showing through the brickwork. Now I can go back and paint these bits again, but it's quite difficult to get into all of the tiny little gaps. So my thought process was that if I could make the filler a darker colour, hopefully any parts where they're not painted over properly won't be quite as noticeable. So I started by adding some grey acrylic paint with some water, and then I added my filler. Obviously, if you're doing a similar project, please do read all of the instructions and all of the safety information on your filler, because they will all be different. Obviously there are lots of different brands. I was mixing this up so that it was a thick paste. I didn't want it to be too runny because I wanted to be able to score lines into it once it was laid over my cardboard pieces. So I applied the filler onto the cardboard using this little palette knife, and it was quite a messy job. The tricky part was that there was nowhere to really hold the doorstep whilst I was putting this mixture on. As well as laying the filler mixture over the top, I also went around the front edge. So once I'd covered the doorstep with the filler mixture, I then used the kebab skewer to just carve away at the mixture to make it look as if there were individual bricks. I then repeated this whole process with the second step. Then it was time to let them dry, so I left them to dry overnight, and in the morning this is what they looked like. As you can see, their colour had changed quite a lot when they dried. I used a piece of sandpaper to give them a quick sand. I wanted to keep some of the texture, but I just wanted to remove any parts that might have fallen off anyway. When I sanded this larger doorstep, I realised that one part of it still didn't seem completely dry, and it's this bit just here. And as I was sanding it, I realised that the dust that was coming off was getting stuck in the grooves between the bricks. So I did actually take my kebab skewer just to try and redefine these grooves. But unfortunately, when I did this, I then realised that I'd knocked one of the bricks and it had fallen out of place. And I then found that the second brick next to it had also fallen out as well. And I decided to glue them back in place and obviously leave this doorstep to dry for a little bit longer. I also noticed that a tiny little corner here had chipped away from this brick. I think it's this bit here, but I decided to not glue it back in place because I quite liked it. I thought it added a nice bit of texture and age to the bricks. So when the doorsteps were dry, it was time to paint them, and I used a mixture of the colours burnt sienna and cobalt blue. These are the colours that I used for the tiles on my doll's house roof, but for the tiles I used equal parts cobalt blue to burnt sienna. Whereas for these bricks, I wanted them to have a reddier tone to them, so I used more burnt sienna than I did cobalt blue. I used the same colour mixing for these wall bricks, but I also added some yellow ochre afterwards. So I don't think I mixed the yellow ochre in completely. I think I just painted with this mixture and then went over with a little bit of yellow ochre paint, if I remember correctly. It will be in the video of when I made the brick walls for the doll's house, so I'll link it at the top. So I completely painted these doorsteps, and I was just using the kebab skewer there to help hold this in place whilst I was painting it. It didn't matter too much about painting at the back because this bit wouldn't be seen, it would be up against the doll's house. So this little step was going up against the gallery floor, and this step would be going up against the wooden bar running along the bottom of the doll's house. I left them to dry, and when they were dry, I just placed them in the correct position to see how they looked and to check that their size was still correct. I should have probably done this before painting them, just in case they needed sanding down a little bit, because obviously the filler had added a little extra height to each step. But the door still opened and closed absolutely perfectly, and I was really happy with them. So the next step was to paint this green piece of wood. I had previously painted this green to match the trim going up and down the sides of the doll's house, but I decided to paint it the same colour as the path so that the doorstep would merge in as if this is part of the step. I'm actually using a scalpel here to try and make a little groove in between the wooden edge and the doll's house gallery flooring. I thought this would make it a bit easier to get a nice neat edge when I painted with the brown colour mixture. As you can see, some of the green paint had gone onto the gallery floor, so I tried to use the knife as well just to scrape this away. Now obviously the craft knife was sharp, so I was being really careful as I used it. I always say these aren't tutorials because I'm not an expert, this is just a hobby of mine, so I would not advise that you copy what I do because I might not always be doing things in the safest way possible, even though I try to. So I painted all of this edge, and as you can see, the colour is slightly different to the path. I did still decide to use the same colour mixture just to paint these little areas where some of the path had chipped away, but I was able to blend this in a little bit, and I will use the pastels afterwards to blend it in fully so that it doesn't look like two different colours. So in terms of the soft pastels that I used, I decided to use this one, which is a nice sort of orangey terracotta colour, and then I also used a black pastel. I didn't really use any of the other colours. I found that the black pastel helps to turn down the terracotta a little bit and also gives a little bit of an aged look to the bricks. I want them to look quite industrial and old. So I repeated these steps for the little doorstep. And I also repeated this step for this wooden bar that goes along the bottom. Again, it takes the sheen and the glossiness off the acrylic paint, and it also helps to camouflage this area in with the path that I'd originally made. I also took the opportunity to just add a little bit of pastel to the areas that I'd painted over where there had been some bits that had chipped away, and this helped everything to look really cohesive. Once I'd finished with the pastels, I took everything outside into the garden to give it a quick spray with some Fixative spray. Obviously there are instructions and safety information on the spray, so if you're doing anything similar, please do refer to the instructions and safety information. So once this was dry and the pastels were set, it was time to glue it in place. This little door has a little scratch on the bottom of it, but I quite like it because I think it makes it look old. But it actually doesn't shut correctly. It just comes out a little bit at the bottom on the right hand side. The reason for this is because the door is actually not attached using hinges. It's attached using a little piece of fabric down here, and I think it's just stuck slightly at the wrong angle. But I think I'm going to leave it as it is. It's not too much of a problem. And I don't really want to replace the whole door because I think it looks quite nice. So this is what the little doorstep looks like. So next I think I need to decide what to do with this little window, because once that is in place, all of the outside of the doll's house will look pretty much complete. Let me know what you think. I'm pleased with how it's looking. I think the doorsteps made quite a big difference to making the doll's house look finished from the outside. If you've enjoyed this video, please do remember to subscribe, and if you'd like to leave a comment, please do, because it's always lovely to hear from everybody. I hope that you've enjoyed the video, and I will see you next time. Bye!